Welcome to an extended edition of 7:30. You know that something special happened on Saturday night when an ancient political oracle like the Australian's Paul Kelly names this as the most extraordinary election he's seen in his 5 decades as a political journalist. Anthony Albanese emerges from the contest as an enhanced Prime Minister who will put Labor's imprint on the nation and guarantee a long term for Labor in government. That achievement puts the deceptively clever everyman Albo up there with some of the most consequential Prime Ministers of this country's history. The news from the other side of politics is despair, wrangling and backbiting as the heavily beaten Liberals look to pick a leader not too badly damaged by Peter Dutton's implosion. That's where we're at today. Ecstasy and agony. Coming up in this hour-long programme, analysis from our reporters across the country, Anthony Green on the seats still up for grabs, and I'll be joined by Labor and coalition frontbenchers. First, here's our political editor, Laura Tingle.
I don't want to mention pre-poll because people are actually now drinking every time I say pre-poll.
There's nothing to suggest that the swing is on to the coalition in any sort of way.
It's a big swing that's on at the moment. I can't see how it turns around. Now, this could be a big win for Labor, but it's certainly a win.
In the end, it wasn't even close. It was everywhere, and the swing was to the government, not away from it. Pundits had spent months trying to count up the 19 seats that could just maybe give victory to the coalition, or alternatively, how Labor could possibly find enough seats to stay in majority in the face of a mooted wipeout in Victoria. But Saturday night saw seats not on anyone's radar swinging wildly to the government, particularly in Queensland. By the end of Saturday night, it appeared the coalition would be completely missing from 2 of our capital cities, Hobart and Adelaide, and largely missing from the rest. In the past 40 years, there has previously only been a swing to the incumbent government 4 times, and the 2.8% swing to the Albanese government easily eclipsed the swings of 2% or less to the Morrison government in 2019, the Howard government in 2004 and 2001, and the Keating government in 1993. The swing was not just happening in the usual seats either. In Sydney's south, in what is known as the Shire, Scott Morrison's old seat of Cook and the neighbouring seat of Hughes, which elected Liberal Party rebel Craig Kelly 6 years ago, both swung to Labor, and swung hard. Liberal MP Simon Kennedy will hold on to Morrison's old seat, but only after a primary swing of more than 5%. Labor newcomer David Moncrieff won Hughes with a primary swing of more than 11%.
I was surprised at the extent of it. We could see in our focus groups the preconditions for that sort of a result, or Labor holding power and perceptions changing, but no, not to that extent. In focus groups that we do, while you get swinging voters and there's a lot of disillusionment and fickleness, you get voters who, always vote Labor or always vote Liberal, and you're seeing a lot of that fickleness amongst them as well. And look, we're at a time where a lot of people are really desperate with this cost of living thing and are looking for the right answer.
7:30 has checked in with focus group pollster Tony Mitchellmore throughout the campaign. He has always argued that it is the cost of living that has been central to voter sentiment, but things happened during this campaign.
I think there were 2 things that were important in this campaign that changed. One was the perceptions of the leader, and Peter Dutton especially. And the second thing was the context, the mood or the zeitgeist. And the Trump tariff intervention there, that really caught people's attentions, and that affected the mood for change.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike.
Donald Trump loomed over the campaign, both via the uncertainty he brought to voters and in the assertion of which leader could better handle him. Turns out he wasn't really across things here.
Well, I don't know. Albanese I'm very friendly with. I don't know anything about the election other than
he just won again. He was reelected.
The man that won he's very good. He's a friend of mine. I can only say that he's been very, very nice to me, very respectful to me. I have no idea who the other person is that ran against him.
Tony Mitchellmore says there were other things that happened during the campaign that affected the mood, like petrol prices actually going down, taking some of the heat out of the issue. But leadership was a huge factor for voters.
They doubted that Anthony Albanese had that power and that strength to make a difference. He'd been there for 3 years. Cost of living just felt to average voters like it was getting worse and worse. But once we got into the campaign, they hoped and they thought Peter Dutton might be stronger and more formidable, but those perceptions weren't locked in. So that's why the campaign mattered, because they lost confidence that he was that person as the campaign went along.
Saturday was, of course, not a two-horse race. Independent candidates, the Greens, One Nation, and a plethora of right-wing groups were contesting the election and expecting to collectively pick up the votes of about 6 million, or a third of voting Australians. That's created some complex three-way tussles and outcomes that may take days to resolve.
Keeping Dutton out, getting Labor to act on the housing, cost of living and climate crisis, and running a really at the core of our campaign.
The Greens did not have a good night on Saturday, losing at least 2 of their 4 lower house MPs, and with leader Adam Bandt facing a close battle for his own seat of Melbourne. The majority of independent crossbenchers were returned, often with increased margins, though the 2 Melbourne seats of Kooyong and Goldstein remain uncertain.
There is definitely a mood for, well, perhaps the Teals or independents who are seen as non-politicians. The problem for the Greens is they're seen as part of the mainstream scene.
No wonder the Greens leader was talking up the party's results in the Senate today.
I know people won't necessarily always be focusing their attention on the Senate vote, but it is worth a look.
The Greens appear to have won all 6 of their Senate seats that were up for grabs at this election and will continue with a total of 11 senators. Labor has improved its position in the upper house too, projected to win at least 28 seats, compared to 24 in the previous parliament, at the cost of the coalition, whose Senate seats look likely to fall from 30 to 26. The Senate results take a lot longer to clarify. Another minor party which appeared to be on the path back to significant power, Pauline Hanson's One Nation, could potentially hold between 2 and 6 seats, with Jackie Lambie facing a tough and complicated contest with One Nation, Labor and Liberal candidates for the last spot.
It is great to have the honour of being back in the Prime Minister's courtyard. Today, we continue the work of continuing to build Australia's future.
The government has a busy agenda to deliver on the promises it has made in areas like housing, and has signalled legislation to cut HECS debts by 20% will be the first thing on its legislative agenda.
We're not getting carried away. We've been an orderly government. We've been a reform government. The thing that I reject is the idea that we haven't been ambitious. Look at our agenda on the clean energy economy, on childcare, on gender equality, on education, where we went beyond where we said we would.
The Prime Minister came back to Parliament House with immensely enhanced authority, the spectre of a decade of Labor in office, and with his political strategy of calm, down-the-centre leadership proving decisive on Saturday night, even after months of coalition attacks on him for being weak. The coalition, on the other hand, is in a world of pain.
I love this country and I've fought hard for it. We'll rebuild from here. We'll do that because we know our values, we know our beliefs, and we'll always stick to them.
But the problem was voters didn't seem to know the coalition's beliefs or its policies. It's been reduced to a likely parliamentary rump and has lost not only its current leader but possibly also a future one in Victorian MP Keith Wallahan. A battle has been underway since Saturday night over what the coalition should stand for and about the role the so-called culture wars played in the result.
I'd argue we didn't do enough of a culture war in this.
Be my guest. Be my guest. If you want to have more culture wars, be my guest.
The New South Wales opposition leader, Mark Speakman, would beg to differ.
I won't be focused on culture wars. I won't be focused on issues like how many flags I stand in front of. The Liberal Party is not just a party for Anglo-Celtic middle-aged men.
In stark contrast, billionaire Gina Rinehart was today urging the coalition to embrace Trump-style policies despite the party's devastating election loss. In a statement to the Daily Mail, Rinehart said,
"No doubt the left media will now try to claim that the Liberal loss was because the Liberal Party followed Trump and became too right. The two simply don't add up."
I don't mean to labour the point, but it just comes back to, cost of living and improving people's lives and their standards of living. And if those culture wars are going to get in the way of that, or they're going to seem like a priority to a political party, rather than fixing that standard of living and cost of living crisis, then it's a negative.
The exact size of the coalition's losses may not be known for some days, delaying the decision about who will become leader from a field that includes people in the Dutton leadership team who are held at least partly accountable for the policy debacle. A veteran of many past coalition campaigns and often seen as one of the hard men of politics, Mark Textor was ruminating on the result from the banks of the Darling River today about what had become of the party he worked for so long.
Many years ago, I helped pen the offer Hope, Reward, Opportunity. Too often now, the offer feels more like division, retribution, resentment. Those who now aspire to lead must offer something better, something as real as our earth, something recognisably Australian.
ABC's chief election analyst, Anthony Green, is still watching the numbers closely. He joins me now. Just before we began there, Anthony, I asked you how many federal elections you'd done. It took a very long time for you to count on your fingers. Where does this one sit in that pantheon of 13 elections you've covered?
Just extraordinary for a government of the day to increase its vote and increase its vote so dramatically. There are seats that fell in Queensland that Labor has been trying to win for a long time. Ford, Petrie, trying to win those seats back. And in Victoria, to sweep all those eastern suburbs, to win the Aston after winning it at the by-election is a pretty amazing result. And to see the Liberal Party, it's got no seats in Perth, no seats in Adelaide, very few in Adelaide, in Melbourne, just 4 seats in the whole of Sydney. And then losing a lot of seats in Brisbane as well. It's a long way for the coalition to come back because most of the urban membership of the Liberal Party is just gone.
How do we understand that we didn't know this was coming exactly? Why was this such a big result, such a landslide? Why wasn't it more closely anticipated?
Some of it, the first preferences the pollsters got wrong. We don't know the full details yet. I think some of the talk about what was going to happen to preferences wasn't right. It seems that every time you get an independent on the ballot paper, their preferences flow towards the Labor Party. It seems that the coalition is struggling to get preferences from other parties. The Greens are a protest against the Labor Party, but their preferences always go back to Labor. But votes on the right for One Nation or Trumpeter Patriots seems to be more a protest against politics. And those preferences tend to wander all over the place after making their protest vote.
Let's go to some of the seats that are still yet to be finalised, and particularly the Teal seats. There was obviously a lot of attention on whether all of the Teals would get back. Some of them are already back, but Goldstein, Kooyong, Bradfield, where are they up to?
Well, the one thing the Liberal Party did get right is organising their postal vote campaigns in some of these seats. In Goldstein, there's basically a small swing to the independent, but on postal votes, Tim Wilson and the Liberals got 65%. There's a 10% swing to the Liberals on postal votes. A much better performance on postal votes is on Kooyong has narrowed the margin. I think Goldstein will be very difficult for Zoe Daniel to hang on to, and I think Tim Wilson might win it back, depending if that postal trend continues, which I think it still should. In Kooyong will narrow whether it turns around, I'm not sure. Bradfield, there's been a lot of narrowing again on postal votes. The margin's down to 0.2, so it may be that I think it's Giselle Capterian, the Liberal, may win that seat as well. So the Teal position, the independent position, may not look as good today as it did on the night. Do
you expect that those postal votes for Giselle Capterian in Bradfield will flow as firmly as you're saying they will in Goldstein?
The thing in Goldstein, it's so close. I mean, it's flowed so strongly, that trend is not going to turn around. And the gap, the 95 vote lead that Zoe Daniel has, is not going to be turned around on the rest of the postal votes. I think it's a slightly different position in the other 2 seats. So Bradfield, I think, is sort of slowly slipping away from the independent. But again, let's see the rest of the counting.
Yes, OK. Now, one of the other big surprises on Saturday night was the possibility that the Greens leader could lose his seat. Where's that up to?
I'm not convinced of that. It's opened up because the Green vote is only bit over 40%, which is much lower than normal. They have picked up areas south of the Yarra, which lowers the vote for the Greens, and there's been a small swing against them on that. What's that opened up is it was the Electoral Commission thought the Liberals would finish second. They didn't. Labor finished second. And because of what the Liberals do with their how-to-vote card, that's bad news for the Liberals. Now, we've got one we've got the postal vote counted out to preferences, and that's flowing 75% to Labor, in which case, if that continues through the rest of the count, Labor will win that seat. But I don't think that the rest of the votes will work that way. The postal votes are strongest for the Liberals in Melbourne. They also are most likely to get a how-to-vote card, and so the preference flows are stronger. I think Adam Banton will still probably win, but there's going to be a fair bit of counting to clarify that.
Just talk to us a little bit about how the Senate is now shaping up.
Well, as Laura said, Labor's likely to gain a seat in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. The Liberal vote, because of the fall in their primary vote, they're only just over 2 quotas in all those states. I don't think the Liberals will win 3 seats anywhere, and they're struggling to get the second in Tasmania. Western Australia, One Nation, has an outside chance. So I think they're competing with Labor for the last spot in Western Australia. I'm not sure they can get more than the 1 seat in Queensland and Western Australia. The count's not as far progressed as in the lower house, but certainly Labor will have a much stronger position. And for the first time in a long while, Labor's got 3 seats in some of these states. You're going back 15 years to the last time they got 3 seats in some of these states.
People will be interested in Tasmania. Jackie Lambie and Pauline Hanson's daughter, Lee Hanson. What's happening there?
Well, I mean, the count's not very progressed. There's definitely 3 seats. There is, I think, the second Liberal and Jackie Lambie and Lee Hanson are sort of competing for 2 seats between them. I think it's always very difficult to do Tasmania. A lot more people vote below the line in Tasmania. That's a big complication in the system. A lot of people are more likely to give their preferences. They're more likely to know the candidates. So it's not like the other states where you can lump the vote together and suggest something rather. There will be people voting below the line for candidates in other groups or go 2 for Jackie Lambie. So you don't really know until you see the actual breakup.
And just very quickly, there was a new seat in this election in Western Australia, the new seat of Bullwinkle. What happened?
At this stage, last time I looked, haven't looked today, it was very close. So the Labor Party could hold on to that, which is interesting because Labor won more, which was the only fully urban seat they didn't hold. They may yet win Bullwinkle, which runs outside of the metropolitan area, and the only Liberal seat left is Canning, which runs from the southern edge of the metropolitan area through Mandurah into rural areas. So
Andrew Hastie's seat. That's
Andrew Hastie, and he got a
important.
swing to him at the election.
Anthony Green, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I want you to hang around and make sure you see what we do with you at the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. Queensland was full of surprises on Saturday night. Above all, the stunning result in the opposition leader's seat of Dickson. Alexandra Blucher was on the ground over the weekend.
It's nothing like campaigning, and particularly the pointy end.
Straight on through.
I think a lot of the policies which came out recently should have been introduced into the campaign earlier so we could have had more time to think about some major issues.
It's been a pretty boring election, I think, thus far. So I think my vote's sort of steering clear of the major parties this time.
While Queensland voters we spoke to were largely unimpressed with what was on offer, the state did stage 2 of the more interesting election contests. The first, could the Greens hang on to its 3 key seats in the capital?
I'm Stephen Bates, I'm your Greens MP. Lovely to meet you.
That's all right.
That's all good, no worries.
And the second,
We voted for the Liberals in hope rather than expectation.
could Peter Dutton extend his 24-year hold over Dickson? Less than an hour after polls closed across the country, the writing was literally on the wall for the opposition leader.
We didn't do well enough during this campaign, that much is obvious tonight, and I accept full responsibility for that. I also had the pleasure of speaking with Ali France. She lost her son Henry, which is a tragic circumstance that no parent should ever go through. And equally I said to Ali that her son Henry would be incredibly proud of her tonight, and she'll do a good job as a local member for Dickson, and I wish her all the very best, please.
After 7 years of trying, Labor's Ailey France had done what seemed undoable.
For the first time ever, I'm told, we have removed an opposition leader from his seat.
The former journalist and para-athlete is one of 8 new Labor MPs, including a new senator who were victorious in winning seats from the coalition and 2 from the Greens.
What impact did the Peter Dutton factor plus LNP campaign have on your win?
I think that we ran the strongest campaign that I've ever seen. So I think that was a factor, absolutely. But I also think Peter Dutton's campaign and the Coalition's campaign was absolutely chaotic.
There's more to being in the community than being on a billboard. People wanted a change. People are seeing themselves in me because I see myself in them. And I think that's really resonated through.
Women leading the charge in Queensland, marching proudly on Labor Day, coincidentally.
How are you feeling?
Tired, but just ecstatic. Ecstatic for the whole country.
And Alexandra Blucher joins me now from Brisbane. Alexandra, obviously we're looking very focused on the fact that Peter Dutton lost his seat, but the Greens also got caught up in the wipeout in Brisbane. Tell us about that.
Good evening, Sarah. They certainly did. So here in Queensland in 2022, the Greens won 3 seats in inner Brisbane. They've lost 2 of those, so the seat of Brisbane and the seat of Griffith, where I am now. Now, the member who lost his seat in Griffith is Max Chandler-Mather. This is his office. And they've also got a seat, the seat of Ryan. Now, that is still being counted, but at the moment, the Greens are ahead. So what's really interesting, Sarah, about these seats, the seat of Brisbane, the seat of Griffith, is that while the Greens lost the seats, they actually held on to their primary vote. So their primary vote stayed at around 30%. So the result for them really was that the LNP, traditional LNP voters in these seats are swinging to Labor, and it's that swing that is seeing the Greens be removed and Labor candidates installed. So what that means for the Greens is obviously Anthony said and Laura said in her package is that the lower house, the power in the lower house has lessened, but as Adam Vance said, you know, they still have power in the Senate.
Queensland was supposed to be heartland. It was supposed to be a stronghold for the LNP. What happened?
Well, interestingly there, you know, they've seen a loss. So the Coalition saw a loss of 5 seats. So 4 of those were in seats that really were the kinds of seats they were going to try and take from Labor around the country, but they lost those here in Queensland. So we're talking about seats like Bonner, and we're talking about seats like Petrie and Ford. So really for the LNP, the soul searching has to happen here in Queensland in urban areas and outer suburban areas.
Alexandra, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Staying in Queensland now, Queensland Senator Murray Watt is the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. I spoke to him earlier. Murray Watt, welcome.
G'day, Sarah, and happy Labor Day from here in Queensland.
Now, one of the big stories of the night on Saturday night was the collapse of the urban vote for the Coalition across the country. In your home state, you won 6 seats in Brisbane, as well as the seat that covers Cairns and northern Queensland. How do you explain that national urban rout?
I think there are a couple of things in it, Sarah. Of course, a particularly amazing result here in Queensland with those numbers that you're talking about and some very high calibre candidates elected to Parliament. But I think it was a combination of the positive agenda that Labor was putting forward to deal with the very real cost of living pressures that urban Australians were experiencing. But also, of course, we highlighted the risk that Peter Dutton posed, whether it be about cuts to wages, cuts to Medicare, the nuclear risk that he had as well. I think there was something a bit broader at play though as well, which is that under Peter Dutton's leadership, we've continued to see that drift of the Liberal Party to the going further and further right in politics, pursuing all sorts of culture wars that frankly are just of not great interest to most people living in urban Australia or for that matter regional Australia. So I think there was a real reaction against that kind of politics. I think women in particular reacted very negatively, particularly working women. And if you look at many of the seats that we've won around Australia, many of them are in outer suburban areas where things like Peter Dutton's ban on working from home went down like a lead balloon. So I think the Liberal Party showed themselves to be very out of touch with the sorts of issues that urban Australians were really concerned about.
You ran an array of candidates in Queensland. Some of them had stood before, like Ailey France, who defeated Peter Dutton, but many of them were new. When did you begin the search for those new candidates?
Yeah, look, in most cases it was at least a couple of years ago. I mean, there are a couple of people who, interestingly, were only pre-selected and only entered the field a matter of weeks ago, which shows you the scale of the result here in Queensland. But by and large, we did commence the search for good quality candidates some time ago. We went into this election only holding 5 out of 30 House of Reps seats here in Queensland, which is frankly unacceptable for a state this big. So we were really determined to turn that effort around, and finding good candidates and starting campaigning early was a really key part of that.
There's been a lot of discussion about the young vote in this election. That demographic will be impatient for substantial change. With a majority like this, how will you be able to resist calls for changes to things like a more equitable tax system, particularly in relation to housing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would argue that even the agenda that we had in our first term was much more ambitious than it's credited for, particularly in the space of housing. And I think this term what we'll see is that we'll actually be able to now deliver a lot of the things that we have promised in housing, whether it be the promises we took to the election or the commitments that we started laying down in our first term.
What about those tax changes that are very popular amongst that young demographic, the changes to negative gearing and capital gains, but more broadly, it's a more equitable tax system for them?
Well, we've made very clear that we weren't proposing to change negative gearing, and we're not about to start scrapping policies and commitments that we took to the election. But we think that we can meet the needs of younger Australians through the policy platform that we did take to the election. Of course, the commitment to reduce HECS debts by 20% was very popular among younger people. The commitments we've made to build more homes for first home buyers, the 5% deposit scheme backed in by the government was very popular among young voters. And I think even implementing the policies we took to the next election will make a really big difference for younger Australians, and I think that they'll recognise that.
At the same time, this is an overwhelming mandate for the Albanese government. Will you use it to take on more ambitious structural reform in the economy?
Well, as I say, I do believe that the agenda we've had to date has actually been much more ambitious than it's given credit for. And, you know, no one can deny that our first term presented a fundamentally different government for Australia than what we'd seen under 10 years of the coalition. And as I say, I think the policies that we presented at the election are very ambitious. I mean, the idea that we can get back to 90% of GP appointments being bulk billed is transformative for so many people's lives. Having a federal government that will seriously invest in social and affordable housing will change people's lives. So I think that the changes that we are presenting will be very ambitious and will change Australia and make it a better place still.
There's definitely going to be ambition in the union movement for you to go further, including an expectation of tolerance around more industrial action, possibly including in the mining sector. How do you resist that ambition?
Yeah. Well, of course, our focus, whether it be in the industrial relations portfolio or elsewhere, will be delivering our election commitments. And we did make commitments in this space, such as legislating to protect penalty rates from being stripped from awards. We said that we would be advocating for a real wage increase for Australia's lowest paid workers. And I lost count of the number of times that I said that if we did have a second term, we would continue to pursue higher wages for working people, because that's been essential to deal with cost of living pressures. So, you know, we understand that there'll be a range of groups who've got a range of asks, but our priority is about implementing the platform that we took to the Australian people.
Is the danger for you, in a sense, the Howard government in reverse? You know, they had a working control of the John Howard had working control of the Senate. It led to the introduction of work choices that was very unpopular. Do you face the same danger in reverse, that there will be a push to make you move much further on industrial relations?
Look, there may well be a push, whether it be on that issue or a range of other issues from people in the community, but you've already heard from the Prime Minister and other members of our team a very clear intent to remain humble, to remain grounded, to not overreach, and to respect the wishes of the Australian people. We are under no illusions about the incredible trust that Australians have placed in us, with many people voting Labor for the first time or the first time in a long time. So we want to retain that trust by acting in accordance with the mandate that we've received. Of course, there will be new things that emerge globally, domestically, that we'll need to deal with. But as I say, our priority is about respecting the mandate that we've been given and getting on and implementing it.
Now, the Senate will be different looking. To pass legislation, you'll need either the Coalition or the Greens. Does that make for an easier term than last time?
Yeah, look, it is a significant change to the Senate, and as a member of the Senate, the idea that we can potentially get an outcome with either the Coalition or the Greens without having to cobble together all sorts of coalitions may make things a little bit easier. I guess it'll also depend on the approach that those parties take in the Senate, and I think if there's one thing that I would hope both the Coalition and the Greens have learned from the last term is that being obstructive to the government's agenda actually ends up rebounding on them. I think that was a really key reason that we saw the Greens in particular go backwards, including here in Queensland. We started campaigning 2 years ago in those seats that were held by the Greens about the fact that they were blocking Labor in the Senate to deliver housing, to deliver environmental reform, that they were voting with the Coalition to block that progress. I think that hurt them very badly. It was probably the number one issue that people were raising and giving for us as to why they were turning away from the Greens. So I hope that they and the Coalition have both learnt their lesson from that.
Murray Watt, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.
Now, Jason on reports on what happened on Saturday from New South Wales.
Hi guys, I'm Di. How are you? I'm the current Member of Parliament. Daily, Independent, 1. And we can be critical of the Prime Minister of the day, because otherwise we won't have a say.
In the marginal electorate of Fowler in Western Sydney, Di Lee had plenty of support from her son on Saturday.
Support my mum, number all the boxes.
And which one your dad?
The independent fighting hard to hold on to her seat against Labor.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
As my mum, obviously I'll be a bit biased, but I see her working, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m, comes home, goes out. She's here for the community. You'll see her at Aldi, you see her at Coles. She doesn't need security. She's part of the community and she's really a true local.
Don't talk too much to the media.
Oh, I got interviewed.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, God, what did you say, baby?
Nothing to worry about.
When you do it, make sure you vote one day late. The result went down to the wire, but overnight, Di Lee's Labor challenger, Tu Lee, conceded defeat.
Good.
Yeah.
We got it.
We got it?
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The one seat that they want to win back, I'm still standing.
Do you have less clout now that there's a majority Labor government?
I think this is the jewel of the Labor crown.
Fowler?
Yes, Fowler is the jewel of Labor crown. So they still haven't got that jewel that they wanted.
In parts of Western Sydney, there were big swings of up to 20% to independents, but not enough to oust Labor ministers in Watson, Blaxland and McMahon.
And you stood with me and we stood together.
In the east, the Teal independents were returned. The former blue ribbon electorates of Wentworth, Warringah and Mackellar could now be joined by Bradfield on the North Shore, held by the Liberals since 1949. The count is still too close to call. Independent Nicolette Buller up against Liberal Giselle Captirian.
We have proven that there is no such thing as a safe seat.
Nicolette ran a really good campaign and she had the messaging right.
I think people are uncomfortable aligning with stereotypical left, stereotypical right sort of thing, and the Teals are a good middle ground for that.
In the south of Sydney, the Liberals lost the outer suburban seats of Banks and Hughes. In Banks, Liberal frontbencher David Coleman was ousted by Labor's Zee Soon.
It's no small feat that you've defeated an opposition frontbencher. How do you feel about that?
I feel really privileged that this community has entrusted me to be their voice in federal parliament, and I'll work day and night in order to make sure that we continue to ensure they have a strong voice, but also this area has the services it needs.
Zee Soon served as a diplomat in Afghanistan in 2011 and ran in the last election.
Why do you think people switched their vote?
Look, a combination of reasons. I think they saw that this government was really focused on the issues that mattered most to them, so cost of living, and so looking at things like the urgent care clinics that opened up were really, really popular in the community, and seeing that government was focusing on things like Medicare.
I was a Liberals voter, but unfortunately this time I did not vote for Liberals.
Why was that?
I was not very happy with their policies. I was not very happy with the way Peter Dutton had led the party. To be honest, if there's somebody like Tony Abbott, yes, I'm back to the Liberals, yeah.
In John Howard's old seat of Bennelong, the Liberal candidate, Scott Yung, was backed by party elders.
Well, Scotty Yung is an extraordinarily competent, and he exerts himself in a way which few do. I think Scott is extraordinarily competitive and will run it very close.
But the Liberal vote went backwards with a 13% swing to the Labor incumbent, Jerome Laxale. A once ultra-marginal electorate, no more.
The Coalition's collapse has many, of course, now asking what's next. The Shadow Resources Minister, Susan McDonald, joins me now from Townsville. Susan, welcome back to 7:30.
Thank you, Sarah.
Nationals leader David Littleproud called it carnage on Saturday night. How did it feel for you?
Oh, it was incredibly disappointing, and I think for our candidates, our volunteers and our supporters right across Australia, this was an election result we didn't see coming. So it was shocking, it was devastating, and I think it'll take us some time to really forensically analyse what happened and move forward.
The Nationals did much better than their coalition partners. Do the Nationals understand their constituents better than the Liberal Party?
Oh, well, I'm incredibly proud of the result for the National Party. We took 16 seats to the last election, and it looks like we'll secure 16 seats under David Littleproud. But as we did under Barnaby Joyce at the previous election, and as we did under Michael McCormack at the previous election. So we do have a strong history of being predictable, dependable, reliable, and having strong candidates who reflect their electorates. And to take the battle up to Canberra. So I think the National Party should rightly feel very proud of the result.
Now, it seems that those words you're using can't be applied to your coalition colleagues at the moment. Problems with the campaign were visible. What went wrong with the way that it was run?
Well, I think that people have said to me, was it policy? Was it our tactics and our campaign plan? Was it the Trump effect? There are a lot of options that we will have to consider, but they're not something that I want to reflect on tonight because, I'm an accountant, Sarah, so that makes me boring, but it also makes me forensic in my analysis. And that's what the parties will be doing, is going back, analysing exactly what did happen as part of our campaign, making sure that we acknowledge that we weren't successful. Australians didn't elect us. But by the same token, 2/3 of Australians didn't put Labor first, and so we need to be making sure that we are a strong, effective opposition and holding them to account on what it is that they do to Australia over the next 3 years.
Now, you don't get to vote for the next Liberal Party leader, but do you want that leader to be more of a centrist than Peter Dutton was?
Look, I am a big supporter of Peter Dutton's. He has the strength of character, the values, and as I describe him to people who don't know him, he's a man I'd follow into battle. So
but if I could just interrupt
I appreciated Peter's leadership.
I can just interrupt there, but he suffered a significant and a severe repudiation. So do you want something different next time?
Oh, well, that will be a decision for the Liberal Party room. I think leadership is incredibly important, and I'll leave that to the members of the Liberal Party to make their own decisions, as I wouldn't expect them to interfere in leadership decisions in the National Party room.
Now, there were, of course, issues of policy that crossed over both the Nationals and the Liberal Party. One of those was your gas policy. We saw problems with the way policy was being prepared and then delivered before and during the campaign. On that gas reservation policy, I understand it was originally supposed to apply only to future projects. It came out, it was about existing projects, which caused consternation in the gas industry. Did you know it was coming well in advance or not?
Well, I think the gas policy is something that I've been working on for a long time. I've been consulting heavily with industry, and we know that it was well received by Australians, the idea of delivering more gas into southern markets
if I may be
keep lights
specific,
on.
in that form, including existing contracts or existing supply, I should say?
There was work done on that policy. I was brought across it more clearly as we came into the budget and reply period, and it's something that we will have to consider, like we will with all of our policies, which are the ones that were successful. But again, this is not a night to be working out which policies we'll take forward and which we won't.
Is that
because
that's
part of a forensic analysis.
Does that suggest that could be a policy that gets changed, junked, significantly altered?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we took a number of policies to the election. I think one of our challenges is that some of our policies Australians weren't even aware of, so that there are elements of policy, elements of communication, elements of the Trump impact, all of these things we need to consider and make sure that we properly do a good analysis, because whilst our policies are not going forward as the elected government, as I said to you, Labor has just had the lowest primary vote. They have a lower primary vote than Mark Latham enjoyed. This is an election of preferences, and so Labor too will need to consider which of its policies that it's taking forward.
Let me come back to you.
Does actually have support.
You just made a clear criticism there of the way that policy was carried out. You said that people weren't aware of some of your policies. How is that possible to arrive at that position during a campaign, and who's responsible for that failure?
Oh, well, I'll give you an example of what I thought was a terrific policy, the resources policy. I'd worked hard on that for 3 years with industry, with our trading partners. And unfortunately, when it was launched, I didn't get one question. Peter didn't get one question from the press pack. I don't say that to be critical. I say that is how hard it is to get cut through in a congested environment. But it is certainly something I don't resolve from the fact that we will have questions to answer about how we communicated our policies and when.
Why do you think the campaign didn't fully embrace, certainly visually or by visits, its own nuclear policy?
I'm sorry, Sarah, I couldn't quite hear what you said then.
Why do you think that the leader and the travelling pack, travelling with the leader, did not fully embrace its own nuclear policy by visiting nuclear sites?
Oh, well, I don't think it's important to be in every location. I think that the policy, which affects not just the places of locations, but Australians right across Australia
to be in none of them, Susan,
affordable.
If I may interrupt, not to be in all of them, but to be in none of them, was that acceptable?
Oh, well, I think that Peter visited Collie earlier, just before the election was called. This is an election not just of 5 weeks, but it was of 3 years, and Peter has visited many of those sites over that time. I don't think that was an important element. I think the important element is, what does energy policy look like in the future? And I'm not sure that Labor has fully thought through its recommitment to renewables only policy, particularly given what we've seen in Spain.
Let's come back to you. One of the issues highlighted in the review of the loss in 2022 was the failure to develop policies that appealed to women, the failure across the board to have an appeal to women. Why, given that was identified so long ago, was it not addressed for this election?
Oh, well, I think that there have been a number of policies that are effective for women as well as other parts of Australia.
Except that very large numbers of women did not vote for the Liberal Party and voted for the Labor Party instead.
Well, the premise of your question is I don't support. We won on primaries in Dixon, in Brisbane, in Ryan, in Kooyong, in places right across Australia, 15 seats in fact, where we had a higher primary vote than the Labor Party. That wouldn't suggest that we were abandoned by women in those places. And that is why, as I already said to you, we will have a forensic analysis of the election results, of our policies, of our campaign, and then we'll be able to have a better discussion about this. I'll be happy to come back and talk to you about that then, Sarah.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in the meantime, Susan McDonald.
Thank you.
To Victoria now, where the coalition was banking on an unpopular state Labor government to flip seats. Instead, it went backwards. Alicia Thomas-Sam reports.
I was concerned, as the campaign unfolded, that we were in trouble.
Scattered on the streets of Melbourne are the signs of a Liberal Party collapse.
I never anticipated that the swing would be as big as it is.
Albo and Allen are double trouble for Victoria.
The coalition sought to capitalise on a state Labor government that's on the nose. But according to former Liberal Premier Jeff Kennett, that didn't work.
That wasn't what was affecting people. People were being affected by tax cuts not being honoured. They were being assaulted by the thought you're going to lose 41,000 public servants.
It was a battle of policies. I think there were policies that were obviously difficult to swallow for the Australian people. When you add in the nuclear energy, I think there was a lot of uncertainty about what a coalition government was going to mean.
Macnamara has a large Jewish population, and Josh Burns, who is Jewish, had his electorate office vandalised in June last year. He retained his seat with a swing towards him.
I think it's been a genuinely difficult couple of years where people have found it financially tough, and what people want is government to be a vehicle to lift you up, and that's what it should be.
The Liberal Party had its sights set on Melbourne to win this election. Instead, voters dealt the party devastating blows. The biggest hit was prominent Liberal member Michael Sukkar. The Shadow Housing and Homelessness Minister lost his seat in Deakin after facing the slimmest margin in the country, 0.02%. In the seat of Menzies, Liberal member Keith Wallahan, a rising star within the party, may lose his seat to Labor's Gabrielle Ung.
I think Menzies with Keith Wallahan is terribly important. I just hope he gets over the line, because he is one of the younger new faces for the Liberal Party, and he's a very bright and astute man.
I know there are still seats to call, but a lot of urban Melbourne voters did reject the coalition. Why do you think that is?
Because our campaign made some fundamental errors that affected individuals, affected families, and I think perhaps the worst one was, in the last week, the idea that we were not going to pass on tax cuts to the community.
Following the loss of Deakin, right now only 3 out of 38 seats in Victoria have been called for the Liberals so far. The urban seats that could still flip in their favour are the 2 Teal seats of Goldstein and Kooyong. Victory celebrations on Saturday night for independent Zoe Daniel and Dr Monique Ryan were short-lived. As counting continues, the gap between the Teals and their Liberal rivals, Tim Wilson and Amelia Hamer, has tightened. Greens leader Adam Bant was confident at the start of election night.
The Greens vote has increased.
But by Sunday, his smile had vanished as the reality set in of a massive swing in favour of Labor rival Sarah Whitty as counting continues.
Well, he's the leader of the Greens, and he therefore got to accept responsibility for the way in which he has been projecting the party. And some of the causes that they've supported in recent times are, in my personal opinion, untenable. So they remind me a bit of the Democrats. They're dying. I think as a force, they've lost their relevance. And they might be able to rebuild it in the same way that the Liberal Party is going to have to rebuild. Time will test that.
To Tasmania now, where spirits were high amongst Labor supporters on Saturday night. Here's Ellen Coulter.
It was a lower house wipeout for the Liberals in Tasmania after Labor picked up Braddon and Bass, held on to Lyons and looked set to keep Franklin. The only seat not Labor-red is independent Andrew Wilkie's stronghold of Clark.
I always was very optimistic that we could get 4 out of 5 in Tasmania. When Tasmania swings, it often swings big.
Yes, Labor had good candidates and ran a good, disciplined campaign, but there was such pushback, particularly in that at the very end, against Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party.
I really don't think people like Peter Dutton. I don't think they particularly dislike the Liberal Party, but they're not actually talking about anything at the moment.
Especially like Peter Dutton, he was trying really to imitate what's been happening in America, and it's something really we didn't want to hear.
He's just out of touch,
yeah.
And he didn't get us normal, the normal people.
Yeah.
In the northern seat of Bass, that sentiment may have been felt most keenly. With a state Liberal government in its fourth term, moderates are popular in Tasmania, and Bridget Archer was considered a favourite in Bass.
Of course, sadly, a vote for Bridget was a vote for Peter Dutton, who didn't have Tasmania's best interests at heart, really.
Teacher Jess Teasdale snatched the seat with an almost 10% swing to Labor.
I'm a bit emotional. I couldn't be more proud of what we have achieved in the last 6 years together.
The salmon industry was a significant feature of this election. Labor's last-minute legislation to shore up West Coast salmon jobs might have paid off in Braddon, where Senator Anne Urquhart takes over the seat from the retiring Liberal member with a whopping 15% swing. Salmon industry disease and animal welfare issues created concern in the very safe Labor seat of Franklin during the campaign period. And after the Greens candidate realised he held dual citizenship, Climate 200-backed anti-salmon campaigner Peter George looked like a wildcard possibility. He garnered 22%, but not enough to stop Labor claiming victory in a seat the Fisheries Minister has held since 2007.
I'm really humbled by the support that I've received in the seat and the fact that my primary vote increased.
The fact that an independent got over 20% of the primary vote, that was a very strong anti-salmon vote.
But former state Labor leader Rebecca White doesn't believe salmon was a big issue for the people of Lyons who voted her in.
It came up so rarely because people were talking to us about all those other things that they wanted to see delivered for their local communities, and health and cost of living were the key issues.
And Ellen Coulter joins me now from Hobart's Eastern Shore. Ellen, how is the coalition explaining the result on Saturday night?
Well, there's potentially a little less soul-searching and a little more finger-pointing going on down in this part of the country among the Liberals. Sarah, we haven't heard from Liberal Bridget Archer since election night when she lost the seat of Bass. On the night, she said to her supporters and campaign team, that there wasn't anything else they could have done. Other Liberals have a few other theories about what went wrong. We've heard on radio today from the former member for Braddon, Gavin Pearce. He said, obviously, the impact of Trumpism didn't help things down here, but really the campaign needed to be more localised. And that's something that has been echoed by Senator John O'Doniam, who's a Liberal down here who wasn't up for re-election but was involved in the campaign down here. He's really laid the blame with the national campaign strategy coming out of Campaign HQ in Sydney. He said that there was inaccurate and bodgy polling coming out of the mainland, that it wasn't what Tasmanian Liberals were hearing on the ground. They went and did their own polling, he said publicly, and realised they were in trouble a few weeks ago. But he says when they wanted to talk about local issues, he says like local health initiatives and forestry, the campaign headquarters interstate just didn't get those issues, and they didn't get the clear air to pursue that. He said they were sort of blocked from pursuing the local issues. So obviously really unhappy and laying the blame there. I haven't been able to get in touch with the Coalition Campaign HQ to get a response to those comments, but obviously a lot of discontent among Liberals down here about how the strategy nationally didn't play out so well in Tasmania.
And Ellen, on the Senate race, 4 of the positions in the Senate from Tasmania are already fixed, but not the remaining 2, and that includes possibly Jackie Lambie. What's going on there?
That's right. So I think, as Anthony said earlier, we've We've got two Labor, one Liberal in Claire Chandler, and the Greens' Nick McKim, likely going to be re-elected into those initial 4 spots. The remaining 2 are really interesting because we've got 3 or 4 candidates who are sort of vying for those, battling for those. One is Liberal Richard Colbeck, former Coalition Minister. He's told the local newspaper, I think, has indicated that he's feeling optimistic, but he's certainly not safe. Then you've got the possibility of Labor picking up a third, but then it's really interesting. You've got Senator Jackie Lambie doesn't have a quota. Now, she's been very vocal on issues that she hasn't been vocal on in the past, thinking Salmon in the national media and the Hobart Stadium, which she has a lot of concerns about. So it's sort of unclear at the moment how that's played out for her. Interestingly, sitting just below her is Lee Hanson for One Nation. So that's Pauline Hanson's daughter. She hasn't run before. It's the first time she's run in Tasmania. It's unclear if she's going to be able to catch Jackie, but really interesting to watch those final 2 Senate spots play out between 3 or 4 candidates. Very early days, but really interesting to watch.
Well, stay with it. Ellen, thanks very much for joining us. That's the programme for this evening, but before we go, the ABC has celebrated Anthony Green's final election. Tonight, it's 7:30's turn to say farewell, and from me too, thank you, Anthony, for everything.
Anthony was hired in 1990 on a short-term contract to come and work on the federal election behind the scenes.
He certainly didn't come with years of polish in front of a camera, but what he did have was absolutely authentic.
There isn't a lot of change in these boundaries. There's some rearrangement.
He said to me before he wasn't sure whether the ABC, would put him on air because his manner's quite quirky. But actually, I think Anthony's manner is one of the things that really works for him.
He just had this unquenchable passion for politics, and he was this kind of natural data analyst as well. And we did invest in him, and he repaid that in spades.
And welcome back to the tally room where things are really starting to hot up. I've just been hearing too that our election analyst, psephologist extraordinaire Anthony Green has already suggested that the government will be returned on these early figures.
They look like they're being returned, but they're not doing nearly as well in the seats, in their marginal seats, as everyone would have expected.
He was a new face and a completely different personality, I must say, in terms of the election coverage that the ABC had put on over the years that I'd been watching and been a part of. He was a real boffin.
These graphics, by the way, are being fed by our computer under the direction of Anthony Green. Anthony?
Prior to then, people would be basically scratching numbers, on the back of an envelope, like actually doing mathematical calculations.
They knew who to ring, they were getting their feeds from around the country. But Anthony was relying entirely on computers.
That would then make predictions as well, and you could see where trends were going. That was just absolutely revolutionary.
There was an absolute magic in that software that he produced and refined over the years.
We'll be following the count through a special computer program designed by the ABC's election analyst Anthony Green.
The 93 federal election, where Keating won the election that everybody expected him to lose, was the first time I saw Anthony Green on a political or election set.
It was this incredible night because Anthony was saying the computer's predicting Keating's going to win, and at the ABC board level they were kind of watching the broadcast and going, well, that can't be right because everyone thinks Keating's on the nose. I don't know how he had the guts to do it actually. It must have been absolutely terrifying to have to make that call, and he was right.
Basically, what we're seeing is a swing to Labor in a series of states.
Anthony Green, thanks very much. Our computer is calling a result here, a clear win for the Labor Party.
And he slowly became this cult figure, and he went from icon to election guru.
Thanks for being with us. I'm Lee Sales.
When the executive producer comes in my ear and says Anthony's ready to call it, I feel quite sick with anxiety. Like I'll start shaking because I feel like this is a really, really big moment, and if we get it wrong, it's like a career ender for the people involved. But the person that the words actually come out of their mouth is Anthony, not me.
We have some breaking news. We're going to go to Anthony Green.
We think the Morrison government has been re-elected.
The thing that kind of enabled me to just go with it is because I just have so much trust for Anthony. I always felt when I was in the driver's seat, like, 90% of my confidence came from the fact that Anthony was standing at the wall, that he was the person there.
Look at the overall vote.
Anthony's made an enormous contribution to our democracy, to our democratic process. The particular flourish, the knowledge, the enthusiasm that Anthony has brought to our screens over so many elections. I don't know how you measure the contribution that he has made, and I do know that he'll be extremely sorely missed.
I can't see how the coalition wins from here.
So you are categorically ruling out anything other than a minority or majority government for Anthony Albanese tonight?
Probably.
Just to be clear, you're saying Labor has won, either in a minority or a majority government?
This could be a big win for Labor, but it's certainly a win.
It's certainly a win for Labor. I think we can take that as Anthony calling it as a win of some sort for Labor tonight. And look, this will be the final call that Anthony makes, and he might firm up that call as to whether it's a minority or a majority. This is his last night with us as our Chief Elections Analyst.
I think Anthony's contribution to public life in Australia is actually priceless. It's hard to come up with the words to convey what he's done to help the public understand election results and also just in terms of pioneering new ways to understand election data. He's just a legend.
He is just a legend. Thanks very much for your company. Good night.